starts in
I
September.
thought you said Rocktoberfest.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I misunderstood. I thought you said Rocktoberfest.
And apparently it starts in September
Yes. I actually knew that.
in Munich.
Okay, so we're going to start with a review of Parkside one-day street recommendation, and I think Frank, you have a little bit to tell us about that.
Yeah, so just to go back the history a little bit of how this came about, I'd say for at least about a year and a half or so, I've been meeting with community members on Sycamore and Parkside Way about some traffic issues they're having there. So complaints about speeding, just complaints about volume of traffic, trucks, commercial vehicles, things like that. So Officer Dunley, who's our traffic enforcement officer, and I have been meeting with them periodically as a group. A lot of times in here just to discuss issues, potential solutions, and things like that. Then we had that construction that was happening on Harriman Road for quite some time, and we were using Parkside Way as a cut through to divert traffic because of the construction, was increasing volumes there. That just made the problem a little bit worse. Since the construction has ended, we've continued our meetings, and it kind of morphed from Sycamore and Parkside to almost just Parkside people that wanted to meet about their road. So we continue to meet with them to discuss the issues that they're having. Basically, the people from that live on Parkside Way, originally their concerns were vehicles were speeding excessively on that road, causing dangerous conditions. I'm sure you're all familiar with that road. So we used the village's jammer equipment to put out there for about a 2.5-week period to collect data. We determined that the speed rating was very low and nearly non-existent at 1%, meaning almost 99+% of people are within the speed limit thresholds. Additionally, records only indicate there's been one accident there in the last 15 years, which was a more recent accident that didn't cause any injuries. The vehicle struck a guardrail. But with that being said, the way that road is, how narrow it is, and kind of winding with the hill, even 25 miles an hour, which is the legal speed limit that we can't go any lower than that, still could pose, a dangerous condition for pedestrians. So without being able to lower the speed limit, we tried to come up with some additional ways to increase the traffic safety on that road with the community members that live there. And the two main ways that we spoke about was exploring making it a one-way street, or the addition of a physical change like a speed bump or speed hump, keeping it a two-way street or some type of combination of it. So my suggestion would be to look at making a one-way street first, or we did any type of physical changes like speed bumps. And changing a street from a two-way street to a one-way street has advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are eliminating the potential of head-on collisions and sideswipe collisions as cars aren't going, opposite directions. Should be safer for pedestrians to cross because there should be less volume of vehicles on the road, and less vehicles, traveling. They're only traveling one way, so you have more of a gap for people to cross the street and things like that. Some of the possible disadvantages would be, especially in the beginning, driver confusion. People that live here their whole lives used to coming down that road, at first, would just take a little bit of time and education and really, really good signage to make sure that everybody knows it's a one-way street. Could increase travel distances, but in this scenario, it's not too much of a travel distance increase because it's really going to affect most of the people that live on that street. Otherwise, you're going to continue down Harriman, or if you did, you'd still be able to cut up it if you were to make it a one-way going up. So
it'd be a one-way going from Broadway to Harriman.
From Sycamore to Harriman.
Well, yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
from Broadway to Harriman. Yeah. So that would be my suggestion if it were to be a one-way street, that it go from Sycamore to Harriman. The reason being that would decrease the volume by a greater amount, by 62%. It's 62% of cars are coming the other way, so that would decrease it that much. Also, you're going kind of uphill a little bit, which is perceived as a little bit safer, that cars are going to travel slower. The jammer equipment did show people travel slightly slower that direction. So people should be traveling slower, and you have a lot less volume on the road that way. Some of the other disadvantages could be potential increased speeds. Sometimes people do know when there's no car coming towards them that they could go a little bit quicker. That could be a potential, but that's it's not a given. And sometimes people don't pay attention as much when they're on one-way street because they know no cars are coming towards them. Those two disadvantages too. So like I said, I would suggest making a one-way street from Sycamore going up to Harriman. That'd probably be the better way to do it. We spoke with the fire department too in the ambulance corps to make sure that would work for them, and they had no problem with it as well.
Yeah, it doesn't change anything on the outbound direction.
Correct. So
Right. Coming home, they have to go down Harriman, but
Was
that's,
there any objections by residents on the street?
no,
I was gonna ask.
not the ones that we met with, and I think we met with 4 of the households there, so there was no objections. They were very pleased with the
They
idea.
wanted it to be one way?
Yeah,
Wow.
they're the driving force behind this, mostly the community. So that's what that's what stemmed the meetings and kind of the follow up and everything else. So one additional thing, a few other things that we did were DPW came and cleared out some of the signs because some of the foliage was kind of hanging over the signs to try to make that a little bit more clear. And then in addition, if we did make it a one-way street, I would suggest painting some type of pedestrian line, or painting off a strip on one side of the road so people can walk there. Plus, it's like a visible identifier for drivers to not cross over to that part to make it a little bit safer for people walking. That was one of the.
So I assume there's no sidewalk, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, there is no sidewalk.
So it'd be like creating like a sidewalk.
Right, like just a bit, a little bit of a visible line for drivers and for people to kind of stay put. So
How many homes are on that street, do you know, offhand?
I don't know, there's 5 or 6 total.
But I just want to make sure that, everyone's notified.
It affects the people on Sycamore also, though, right? Because they now wouldn't be able to go.
They won't be able to cut through to get to Sycamore.
Right.
From Harriman.
Right, they would have to go to the stop sign and make the right up to Sycamore, which, when I've driven it out a few times, I don't think there's really any difference in timelines.
it's marginal at best. The
Now you have to slow down to travel on Parkside, instead of going to the stop sign, making the right, I think it negates it.
I think the community is experiencing the fact that these GPS units or the phone
Absolutely.
GPS like Waze routinely, when you're coming down Harriman, sends you down Parkside Way to get to Broadway. I mean, I don't personally do it, but I see it all the time.
Mhm.
And it's like you said, if it's a 30-second difference, it would be a lot. But, that's what's causing the extra volume, clearly.
It's funny you said it because I lived here, I don't know how many years, I don't know when it was, but I've been here for years and I'd never been up there. And I was going somewhere, so I was going the direction that will still be legal going up. And it put me there and I'd never been there. And I'm going out like this winding road. I'm like, why is Waze putting me on this road? Like, so if we can do something to make that less possible, that's a good thing too.
Right, well, and
Experience, how long it takes to get updated. If we change it to one way and wait to send people the wrong way,
yeah, no, it's true. I know that there was some outreach on in your department side, right?
Yeah, we reach out to like Google and Waze and stuff to explore. Larry had gave us an idea to say, there's other communities where roads aren't closed, but they'll show up closed on the GPS apps for whatever reason. If the government agency might ask them to do it, so we reached out to them, but we have never really heard back from them about that.
But we'd have to coordinate that to make sure it happens at the right time.
I believe
They had Station Road closed when there was,
Yeah.
when the
When it was completely
road
closed.
was.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They pick up,
I think they must get some information from public sources that
Right.
get their records pretty quickly on this stuff.
right, and also they have data that they gather from all of their users that
Right.
show that no one's driven on Station Road for 3 months, you know what I mean? So,
It's a hazard too.
right, exactly. So there's lots of that stuff, but we can see if we can try to force the issue and make it update. We haven't had experience doing that yet.
I believe Waze is owned by Google and uses Google Maps as the source of its maps. So if Google
Yeah.
Maps gets changed, everything that matters gets changed.
All right, any other questions or comments? So we can do, I'm sorry.
what are the next steps? Would we have a public hearing for this?
Yeah, so this requires a very minor code change, which Mary Ann will draft up. It's a local law. It'll be about 1 sentence long. But we still have to have a public hearing and just like any other local law. So yeah, it'll happen that way.
It's good. It gives an opportunity for anyone who doesn't want it to come and tell us why.
Yeah. But we didn't want to just have that show up as a public hearing first off the bat. We wanted to at least have this conversation here and make sure that everyone's okay with it, have a chance to ask any questions. And then if you're accepting of it, we'll go forward and do the law.
Any other questions? Or?
Thanks.
So the next item, Frank, you're also
You can't get out
This
yet.
was your day, Frank.
This is an update on leaf blower enforcement.
Okay. So since May of this year, we've received and responded to a total of 11 leaf blower complaints. Potential leaf blowers in operation against the ordinance. Out of the 11, 6 of them were unfounded, meaning we didn't observe them, or when we showed up they were gone, or we couldn't locate anybody at all. 2 instances, warnings were issued to people using gas-powered leaf blowers, and in 3 instances, summonses were issued. Out of the 3 summonses that were issued, 1 was issued to a homeowner, 1 was issued to the owner of the company, and 1 was issued to an employee. And that was once again since May up until today. So 11 total complaints. In addition, Charlotte we finalized a warning that we're going to be using to hand out in the next few weeks as it gets kind of close to the season of where they're going to be allowed for this last period of time. This kind of when I think more calls come in because people start using it a little bit more frequently. So this has just got finalized yesterday. We're going to print a bunch of these up and start handing them out to landscaping companies that we see operating within the village to warn them, to let them know. Can't use them up until this date, and then once December 16th comes, we're all done with that. So that's our plan for the next few weeks as the season kind of ramps up.
Questions?
I would consider it to be a low amount. Would you consider it to be a low amount of actual violations?
Yeah, it's, during the summertime, it doesn't seem to always be that high. I think the fall, like coming up now, is where we're going to start getting a lot more complaints, once the leaves start coming down. So, the next couple of weeks up until October 1st, we might get some more complaints, and then I think after the cutoff is when we also get a lot. People are trying to finish some, lawns and properties and things like that, and they want to squeeze them in after the dig. So I think those numbers will go up.
I know that when we talked about this before, you were concerned about ticketing homeowners. And obviously you ticketed 111.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious in terms of ticketing the homeowner, was that a very neutral experience or a very negative experience?
I think it's I believe in this particular instance, this was a place we went to a second time. I think warning was given the first time, and then second time, and I believe it was the homeowner themselves using the blower. So it wasn't necessarily a homeowner or the place where a company was doing it. So.
Right, I was going to ask how in those 3 situations it was decided who got what ticket.
So, like I said, the homeowner one was, I believe, was the homeowner themselves using a blower. I think they were warned once the week prior, and again, and they responded again. One of them, the owner of the company, was on scene, so they were issued the summons, and then the other one, the owner of the worker was on scene, so they were issued the summons. But overall, I think if we do a good job with the warning letters and outreach, I think once the full ban comes into effect, it's not going to be a problem. Everybody's hopefully aware of it and had their fair share of time to plan accordingly to get it done. I don't think we'll have any real issues.
Yeah. So my concern is that always like that the lowest person on the totem pole, which is the worker that has the least control. So I just am assuming hopefully that is the last resort, that the level of responsibility flow to the owner of the company or the homeowner and the worker really be the person of last resort. Because I'm not sure.
I think the way, and I think this was from Larchmont when I reached out to them because they had that abandoned effect. That's kind of how it goes. If the owner of the company is there and available, they would get the ticket and not the worker would get the ticket because they're the ones kind of controlling the scene then. The homeowner would be on the hook either way, the way it is now, whether they're there or not there. The owner of the company could be on the hook even if they're there or not there. But if they're there, they'll get the ticket. But if they're not there, we'd still issue the worker the ticket like they do, then continue to follow up with the company to issue the ticket to the owner as well as follow up with the homeowner.
Yeah, because I think in one of the hearings that we had, I think I was revoked, but I remember one of the landscaping companies basically being very clear that they will not pay the tickets for the workers, which I think is very problematic. So I'm assuming if they're gonna, so is there follow-up in the case of when the workers issued the ticket? Does the homeowner still get a ticket or not?
Yeah,
I
that's
think
how,
we talked
that's,
about that.
yeah, so basically how it would be lined out would be, the homeowner's there, they would get the ticket. If they're not there, we'd still follow up with them, and issue a ticket if that's what we're gonna do. If, like the owner of the company is there, they would get a ticket, but the worker would not get a ticket at that point. The only way the worker would get the ticket is if the owner of the company is not there. They would have to get the ticket then, but then we would also follow up with the owner of the company to issue a ticket to the owner as well.
Okay, so then in this scenario with like 3 tickets issued, it almost would seem to me that there should be 3 tickets to owners, right? Because if you issue a ticket, or 1 ticket already, in this scenario where the owner got it, but
Right. Yeah, in the stats I gave you, that's not how we've implemented it yet. This is the plan moving forward once the full ban goes into effect. Right now, we're kind of just trying to, work our way through it, how we've been doing it.
Spend time on
Yeah.
warnings
Right,
and whatnot.
and really trying to educate more than,
yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
in instances, I think when the summons are issued, it's repeat offenders for the most part.
No, I think that makes sense,
Yeah.
and I think it makes sense to like educate people. My concern sort of long term is really issuing tickets to workers is not my preference. Doesn't have any real say in anything. So. If to me, like if there's only a worker, I would expect to see 3 tickets anyway, right? Like a follow-up with the owner of the property, a follow-up with the owner of the company. Because my concern when I heard the landscaping person speak, that was completely unacceptable to me, which was, I'm not paying those tickets, right? And if I'm not there, then I can kind of get away with it. I don't know how effective this will be in terms of changing behavior.
Right, yeah, the follow-up has to happen with the company, otherwise, they have to feel it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like you said, they're not gonna care, they're not gonna change. They're gonna keep sending everybody out, telling them to do it, because they're not getting the negative effect of it. So, I agree.
Yes. Well, I think we have plenty of time to.
Charlotte has her hand up if you're interested. I know it's not a public hearing, but if Charlotte's on if you
Oh,
want.
Charlotte's on. Okay.
Yeah, hold on.
No, I think we can make the,
Yeah, as your,
some time for Charlotte as our sustainability coordinator.
The leaf blower issue, you mean?
yes,
Oh, okay, so I want to make sure what she's talking about.
yes, no, that's it. Yeah, it's this issue. Hold on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Position allows.
Yes.
Yes.
I agree.
Great. So I just wanted to ask, we have not resolved a potential form for people to report when they see and hear violations. We've gone back and forth a little bit, but regardless, I have heard, a number of people who've been monitoring this for years talk about where there are repeat offenders who are kind of predictably showing up and violating. And I wonder if it wouldn't hurt, even if we don't do the public forum for reporting, just to meet with these people so that there can be some anticipation, because I know quite often by the time they call, you get there, they're gone, their trucks aren't marked. I hear all kinds of things as to why it's, complicated to enforce. And I think anticipation could be a great thing if there's really, really repeat offenders. Is that something that you'd be willing to do, Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. If people have information about repeat offenders that are constantly at a location at certain dates and times, that's pretty easy. We could definitely link up and discuss that.
Great. So I'll set up those meetings so you can get that download. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Thank you.
So as I said, I think our intention is to still allow public comments at a upcoming board meeting,
Yes, yeah, so,
or board meetings.
right, so I wanted to have it pushed out a little further so we could at least publicize it to let people know that it's kind of the last, the last word, so to speak. So more than likely the first meeting in October, people will have a chance for some additional feedback. And then at that point, you either make a decision to change what's happening or keep it the way it is and let it sunset.
Okay, thanks. Next item is discussion of village celebrations. discuss.
So this came about
Go
just
for
to.
Yeah, no problem.
Frank.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you
Frank.
so much,
Take
Steve.
care.
So this came about from some questions that were raised about what, just to get some details on what events the village holds, how much we spend on each of those events, to get a sense of where the resources are spent. And so that's what Katie's done here. I think she has a
Yeah, I have,
document here.
I made a couple little tweaks to the original
Yeah,
one.
thanks.
So this isn't
I
the same
sent
as what you
out-
sent?
It is, there's one additional page and then I had to revise one of the numbers.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I should look at this then.
Yeah.
Okay. Here, guys.
So on here, the first page is pretty much just what is in the budget. It was last year's budget, and this year's budget's numbers, broken out by the events, that we have in the budget. And then on the second page is kind of a more in-depth, breakdown of what goes into each of those numbers. The third page is actuals for last fiscal year, for what each of those events came in as. And then there was a couple other expenses for events. So I put those at the bottom. And then the last page is year-to-date events and the expenses for this fiscal year so far.
This is my immediate question for fireworks. I thought, oh, this is actual for this year. Didn't we, I thought for this year, oh, I see adopted, never mind. I know that we have the budget for fireworks and thought we would get
Yes.
donations.
Yeah. I don't believe we got any donations, so that's something we kind of have to, find the money for
coming
this year, yeah.
Yeah, I thought we had it for 2024. We didn't have it for 2023, did we?
For 23-24. So, so this most recent, July 4th was in this fiscal year, so the one that was halved,
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah.
Guess we need to do better outreach on that.
Yeah, I know that was Brian's suggestion, and I think, it just didn't materialize, so you're gonna have to figure it out, because the money's already spent.
Yeah.
As you know.
Can't put the fireworks back into their
Exactly.
shells.
We want a refund.
I guess I will sort of start commenting on this. I think, I guess I think we need to sort of think about what additional, sort of like what we have done and what we see the village doing going forward. And are we going to just increase the budget for celebrations, so that, because some celebrations that we've added have been sort of from our contingency budget? Or are we going to have an overall budget and reallocate things from this budget? And, I definitely think that one of the things that, one of our top priorities is to be a welcoming and inclusive community. And I think that means that we need to look at the celebrations that we do, make sure that they're in line with being a welcoming and inclusive community, and then make sure that we fund our projects in that way. So I just think we have to look at what we do, and that, necessarily means, we have to have a discussion. Are we just going to increase the budget, or are we reallocating?
What's interesting to me is I was looking and how, there were some events that were added under the added column, I guess that's the last page, you know, it says Pride Entertainment, $200, right? So we basically ran the Pride Day this year completely volunteer, completely, the only expense was having someone to, you know, to play some music there, and the rest of the event was completely, you know, by volunteers and didn't cost anything. And I'm not saying every event should be that way, don't get me wrong, but it's interesting that events can be run on that gamut, from a bunch of community members who are interested in the topic getting together and putting the event on versus having a full-blown, heavily, you know, funded event. And I think that's part of the discussion also, to me anyway.
Yeah, one other thing I'm curious about is like how we can, in like a cost-efficient way, support groups that want to have events, maybe with village resources. Like as an example for like the Bulldog fundraiser, I remember talking about like, you know, do we need staffing if we're using, you know, different parts? And I think Larry suggested like, well, you could do it at Village Hall and not have any staffing, but then something like, you know, for Juneteenth, we spent, you know, $700 on staffing. So I guess I'm just curious. I don't think I understand the rules. Like, let's say that, making this up, totally hypothetical example, but like Charlotte wanted to do an Earth Day celebration or something like that, and she wanted to use the O'Hara Nature Center. Like, would that cost a minimum like $800? Or, you know, I guess like when can we incorporate village resources without, I don't know, do we always have to pay for those things, or is there a way to like, I don't know, somehow partially donate resources or something like that? I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard if like, I care about the environment, I want to run an environment event, but I have to come up with $800 to be able to have it somewhere in village property. Yeah.
Well, do we ever pay for the property, or are we only paying for labor? I think we're only paying for labor.
It's
right?
labor, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, the differences are because of really the location and the nature of the event. So if it's in a village building, there's going to be village staff there. I think that goes without saying, that we're not going to have
Right, sure, yeah.
people using the buildings without someone responsible there. In the case of Juneteenth, I think it was more about needing the labor to bring the materials to the location, get things set up, and then break down and afterwards clean up. That was my understanding, but I don't.
So let's talk about Juneteenth, because I think it's a good example. So the Juneteenth event in the park, I think the labor, like what was needed was access to the electrical, but all of the setup, the band did themselves. But I do think we have, as a village, we have minimums, right? So if you have, and for sure that was more people than I had anticipated being there for that event, but there wasn't a lot of carrying of things. That was
Right.
not really it. It was just like presence, right? Village presence. It was a lot of people. It was like maybe 4 people, so that was a lot. For the unveiling, which obviously the Commemorate Committee paid for, that was DPW labor. That was different. That was like moving the chairs, taking them away. But I do think we need some thought and policy around events as we, if we want to have different events, because I think there needs to be some certainty around and budgeting around labor, because I think that's you know, we had this discussion where the 25% wasn't even in the initial thing. So I think events, especially community events where you have mostly volunteers, to like then say, in addition, you have to come up with $1,000 to $2,000 for village labor is hard. So I think we as a board, do have to think about like, what events are we supporting? I think the Bulldog Gallery is a good example of this, which has been run 100% on like volunteer labor. I don't think I'm even so clear on what, you know what I mean, when we need village labor, when we don't need village labor. I think, and I mean, I know from running some events that, you know, you have minimums and like who works has more to do with the contract. So I just think, you know, I think we just have to think through those things, and then also just give some thought to what do our village celebrations look like? You know, what do things cost? You know, I hate to be like the penny pinching person, but like, do you want to spend, do we need t-shirts? Like, I mean, every other event, we don't really buy t-shirts because we don't have the budget for it, but I do think we're gonna have to look at this, and I think the overall question is, are we increasing our budget for our village events, or are we reallocating? Or, and that's just the reality of budgeting, from my perspective. So, and I don't know that we wanna run, it's nice that we have a nice contingency, but I think it would be better if you plan, right? Like, so we see the year ahead and we think about what events we're gonna have, what we're gonna support, rather than being like, we'll just take it from the contingency each time.
We couldn't agree more.
And one point that you said that I wanted to make the point of is, it's not always about amounts, because if you look at the July 4th, the fireworks budget, one thing that's interesting, it's the most expensive event on the sheet, right? But when you look, other than the $124 for Sam's Club, which is nothing compared to the rest of the budget, every single thing in there is directly to things that are used in the event, right? Like the actual fireworks, of course, you have to have people working when you have explosives and stuff. I understand the mess and the cleanup. Obviously, absolutely necessary. You need to have an ambulance, you need to have portable restrooms. It's July 4th, we're gonna buy some flags, that's normal. We had a clown show for the kids, and you need signage to tell people where to go. Like this event, I don't know if the numbers themselves are good deals. That's not where I'm going. I'm saying that the items themselves are entirely necessary items for an event like that. And I think that's the way. It's not a matter of how much. You can run an event that's really efficient, even though it's the most expensive event on the sheet. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I think that that's one thing that we should be looking at. Is it's kind of what you were saying just now. Is like, each item under these things should be looked at. Even like the Pride event, and I was involved in organizing it, full disclosure. It's like when we look at like, well, what did you spend it on? Well, we paid someone to play for an hour and a half. It's like, oh, well, that's a good expenditure to have a party.
You also have free labor.
Music.
That would be
Oh, wow.
for the Pride event.
Oh, I was, yeah,
No.
it was Brian and I and another
Well,
committee.
you were gone this week.
I was, but I was in the planning moving
Yeah,
on, so
yeah.
yes, I kept saying, have you all
Moving
this
on
work
stuff.
for? Yes,
So
there
we
all
had a
this
lot of free labor.
pre-work. I was doing a lot of pre-work in advance for something that I was gonna be in Portland, Oregon, and it happened, but
Yeah.
yeah,
But
so.
my other point is like, when do we have free labor? Like.
Oh, free, you're saying
kids-
literally labor, right?
Like
Yes,
free labor.
yes,
Yes,
yes. Okay. I
literally.
missed your point for a minute. Okay, yes. Yeah, and that's again, what I'm saying is that like, when you look at these events, I think we need to look at, you can't have free labor when you're gonna have the park and fireworks going off and the cleanup from thousands of people coming and
Yeah.
everything, right?
Of course.
But like, I think these are the things that we need to look at in each event, I think is, are the costs of the event going directly to the event rather than other things that maybe do we really need this, you know what I mean, in each case.
So I'm not sure I agree there. Again, I think I've said this before. I don't think it's really up to us to be micromanaging these budgets. I think more along the lines of what Arlene said. I think our position is we define what celebrations we want to see happen, and then we give a budget. And then it's up to either the department that's running that or the administration to run those events as they see fit within that budget.
That's what
And
I
I'm
meant to
not
be
here
clear.
to ask about t-shirts and whether that's worth $250 or.
No, Larry, to be clear, I wasn't saying that we should micromanage in reverse. What I'm saying is when we go over to the side, what we should allocate for these events, I want to look at what they used the money for in the past to see, do we think as a board really need to support that much money for that?
And again, I'm not sure I agree with that statement, because I think what ends up happening is if instead of necessarily budgeting every item on there, again, those bills have to be paid, and when the event happens, those numbers have to be given to Katie or to Larry or whoever it is that is to pay those. But I think, a perfect example is the Bulldog. We didn't know that was going to happen, right? We didn't know that there's also going to be a plan to have an auction for the Bulldogs, so we could never have budgeted for that. But we shouldn't need to go to contingency for that. That should be something, like, I'm not saying that there needs to be contingency necessarily built into this budget, but up until this year, if an event like that or any of these things that cost $750, those things were just done. Were just taken care of and done. And people had to ask to get it done, but they got done. And now we're more concerned about again, I hate to bring up T-shirts, but again, it's our job, I think, to define these celebrations that we as a welcoming community want to include. There's no reason why Juneteenth shouldn't be an existing village celebration. I mean, it's a holiday, it's a holiday. But we also need room for events that we're not planning on that come up. We never budgeted Pride. I'm surprised Pride's only $200 because I know that there were workers putting up tents and things there as well. I don't know whether that
I think they dropped stuff off and then it was all free labor.
And they were, and they were working that day anyway. In other words, they were called in.
Yeah.
Right, but if
They weren't called in for the
called in,
event.
that means that they're taken away from another job that they might.
No, but I think it
there are
literally
costs
was-
involved with all of these
Right.
things, whether they're dollar costs or not. And again, I just think that our job is to define the celebrations that we as a village think are important, to define a budget for that, and not to worry, let them worry. I'm not saying nobody has to worry.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not the board's position.
So how do we know how much to budget?
So
We look at past expenses.
So that's all I was
That's what he's
saying.
saying.
Right.
That's all I'm
that's what
saying.
he's saying.
That's my point.
So I think you guys, I think you're saying sort of the similar things and you're just kind of coming at it at different things. And I think we're new. So we're like, how do you define a budget? You have to look at what was done in the past. But, and I think that it's not an easy position because, some of these events have been going on for a long time and if there's an expectation of like the things that you do. So that's why my initial question is like, do we have sort of we have to define in our own heads too, like what is the overall budget and then how are we going to, how are we going to divide that up? I think one of the really difficult things in having been part of planning things is honestly, and I still don't understand it, is the labor costs. And I think we need some policies and procedures around that because I don't, I've been sitting on this board for 2 years and I don't understand, for Pride, for example, when they're already working and dropping things off versus when I picked up the full bill for DPW, the memory committee. Like I just don't, and by the way, I also think people need to understand, like, if I'm gonna pay $1,000 for labor for them to move the chairs, like an organization like Commemorate, like that, we really did a lot of work to raise that money, that maybe we'll just move the chairs ourselves, right? And like, I think we need some more definition around the labor costs and like when village resources, because quite honestly, city, we had a couple of Bulldog committee meetings about what to do and when to do, like the auction and sort of trying to work together with Town Chamber of Commerce. I can't really, the first thing I said was we need to come up with a budget, right? We need to figure out what volunteer labor is gonna look like, which has been 100%, but like, what things we have to pay for, what money we have, what's in that budget, like what hasn't been paid for. But then the X factor is, I don't know when we need, right? Like Parks and Recs to step in or DPW. I don't quite know that. And then I also don't know, like, if they're working that day and they just happen to run a line, like we don't necessarily get charged for that, or they're moving chairs and we get charged for that. So I just think there's for volunteers that are helping with village events, we need more definition around labor costs because they're not insignificant, right? And most of the things that we're gonna have are gonna be volunteer driven and people don't have a clue about that piece, right? Like I sit on the board and I can't really articulate how that works myself.
Well, again, part of the problem with volunteer-driven events is if you try to have them every year, you don't always get the volunteers to do that. But if you're committed to the event and then the volunteers aren't there, then what happens? So it's difficult to budget on the sort of shorter term events or the newer events or the events that come up. It's certainly a first time or a second time that there's a lot of volunteer effort.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work that way. And if we want to have Juneteenth as a regular event, we need to figure out expenses and budget for that, and then figure out, as you said, and I agree 100%, is that something that we're adding to the celebrations budget, or are we just adding an event and then figure out how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, the Juneteenth is gonna go, this is gonna be the 5th year. So, and, you know, obviously having been involved since year one, the budget is pretty, you know, we know the cost of everything. So if we were going to incorporate that, you know, it's a pretty defined budget. But again, we've adapted to when we wanted to spend less money, like this year, because we had the unveiling and we wanted that to be the focus. But I still think, you know, it's important. I think it is important, like from a village celebration perspective. What you're sort of, I think, hinting at is like, it's important to incorporate that into existing, right? Like the existing infrastructure, if we want to commit to that event long term. I think, because, you know, there's a lot of the legwork and a lot of the figuring out that is like the initial volunteer, but then a lot of that stuff after you do all that hard work, like it can be systematized. And if it's important to us as a village, like I think, you know, the lower lift for volunteers when they don't have to figure out every single like logistical thing becomes easier to do. I think it becomes a little easier. But I do think I agree with you, Larry, that like this discussion, and I would like input from the community, like what events are important, right? And then we have to budget for that. I think that's really, we probably haven't done this for a long time, you know, sort of talked about what's important to the community, what do we want to see happening in the community. But I do think it's important for us as a board to decide, you know, this is a finite budget, or like, you know, which can then means you have to reallocate, or you have to, then you get to what Mitch is saying, which is you have to define a budget, you have to look at what was done in the past, because you can't just arbitrarily pick a budget. And a lot of these things have been done for a long time, right? So we sort of know those fixed costs, and we can't say, you know, we decided we're gonna pay $5,000 for fireworks.
Right, because it doesn't
We'll
cost.
just all be there with some stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that might be it.
And one other thing I think to consider is, it goes kind of to your point, where I was saying we didn't know the Bulldogs were gonna exist. There are Pride and Juneteenth events because people in the community thought, hey, this is something that we should do, right? And I wonder, we have other populations in our village that might be thinking, like, why is there no Diwali celebration? And it's because no one on the border, close to the border, stepped up and said, oh, well, we should do that. Do you know what I mean? So I'd like there to be a way that we can make sure, if we're really going to be inclusive and welcoming, is to find out what other celebrations should we be, because I don't pretend to be all-knowing as to what people want or need in the community. And the reaction to that first Pride last year, and with the flags, and people saying, wow, I can't believe we'd ever see that in Irvington, and we had a lot of those stories. I would imagine there are other communities that feel the same way. I would imagine if we did a Diwali thing, we'd have a lot of South Asian descent people coming to us and saying, wow, I feel seen, you know, things like that. And there's got to be others that I'm not smart enough to know about, and I'd like to find out, you know.
But I think part of that survey also has to ask how much would be willing to do.
Yeah,
having
sure.
this celebration.
Absolutely.
That you were interested.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a lot of us, you know, put our time where our mouth is to make these other things happen, but we're in a position to do that where we are, you know. And,
Yeah.
but that's a great point, Larry. Obviously, yeah.
No, it's a lot of work, right? I think, and I think it's also weird. I just think there's one thing. I just think we need conversations, right? We need conversations with the community about this, and then we can, because I agree with you, like you have to have somebody who's willing to run with it. You know, it's not gonna, you know, it's not gonna be like, hey, Larry, oh, why don't you just do Diwali? Thing? You know, I'll do.
Which I think would be great, but yeah, no.
No, I personally will do. I personally will do Holy, where you like beat people with color packets. I do that with friends, and it's super fun, and beautiful. But I think it's hard for people to run with the ball if they don't even know how to even, you know, approach that as a concept. And if you think like, also I'm going to pay like $2,000 for, you know, if you don't know what that even entails, I think, you know, we can have conversations and then maybe we can do a good job about like educating the community, you know, if you want to do an event, right? Like here's what it would entail. Actually, I have a friend who's a trustee in Ardsley, and I think they have like a packet, you know, so it's sort of like, it's like how much labor, like what resources, so it kind of like leads you through the things that you have to think about if you want to have a you know, some event in the village. Maybe we could work towards that. But I do think we need input, right? It's probably a very good time for a conversation about what celebrations are important to the community, what does that look like, and then it's going to be a conversation with us. Are we increasing the budget, or, you know, are we working within the funds that we have now, and then what does that look like?
So next steps, do we want to sort of think about a public session where we're at a meeting, people can come and speak to their interests and their willingness to volunteer?
And there will have to get.
Was it doing like a survey, like we some other things? I mean, the Malin survey out, is that
What village events would you,
yeah.
what commemorations and holidays
I
and
was just thinking about,
celebrations?
yeah, the one that Charlotte did around environmental programs, like something like that, or do you think the person is better? I don't know.
It sounds like some of the work of the diversity committee, by the way.
Yeah, I was
I
thinking.
mean, you know, something that they could potentially focus on when they get moving along.
Some of the people on that committee don't want to be involved in
Right.
celebrations because they
Right.
say, I don't understand it, but I'm respectful of their opinion. They don't want any part of that.
No, it's not that that's not what they're saying. So I think in the discussions of the diversity committee, so often diversity, right, so it's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mhm.
And I think most people, I think the first step and the easiest step for people is like events. But then events are just events, and I think and so that's like an initial step. But I think people are interested in what came up in our discussion, which was really around equity, right? Some equity issues about, you know, really how do people feel included in general in the village, like, you know, affordable housing, touching on affordable housing and equity issues. So I think that committee the conversations were more centered around sort of like policy, village policies, kind of more aligned with like the police review committee, right? What recommendations for improvements, et cetera, rather than just events. Not that people weren't interested, I think everyone knows events are also important, but they didn't want to be an events committee. Which
That's
is
not what I remember.
understandable.
Just for the
Oh,
record,
okay.
I remember
I
the
mean-
people who said affirmatively, I don't want to be a part of this. This is not right. This is not what we should be doing. It's worthless. It was really kind of denigrated. I had to speak up to try and defend it. I did not do a good job because people were still very anti. Not everyone in the committee, but there was a group of people in the committee that were very against the events, as I recall.
I know all those people, I mean, and I don't understand how you felt that way, but that's not what the real issue is. The real issue is not to get bogged down in events. Because that happens on a lot of diversity committees. You end up doing events and no other meaningful
Right,
change.
right.
Exactly.
I think the events are meaningful. That's why I got a little insulted.
No, it's not that they're not saying they're not meaningful, it's just that you don't get to the policy piece because events are so time intensive, right? Like they take a lot of time and money and effort. So you can't get to the other piece, but that's what I think people are saying.
Anything else?
I mean,
I think a survey
sounds
is more useful than a public meeting, by the way. My sense is that I'm not sure that people are going to get you feedback because you drag them to, or request them to come out to a meeting.
I see how you feel about that.
Yes.
Right.
Well, no, I mean, that's I said it for
Yeah.
a reason, but
It makes it more comfortable.
yeah, and you're in information gathering mode anyway. You're trying to see what might be out there. It doesn't mean you're making that.
You know, going back to Charlotte's survey, part of that survey said, are you willing to become part of a committee? Are you willing to do work to see this happen? And she got names and she got people and she followed up and she has new blood, you know.
So let's do a survey.
They had no idea she's gonna come.
Right. They didn't know Charlotte that they did.
They didn't have any clue.
I mean, we're not making a decision now, but it seems like, I mean, I think we should add like Juneteenth and Pride to like the official list. And once we figure out what that means later.
It's like this.
Right, yeah, during budget season for sure.
Budget to $200 to get a performer.
We should
Okay,
increase the budget.
next item, okay?
Yeah, no, I was,
Next item is review of request from the Irvington Historical Society for financial support.
So it was attached to the agenda, I believe, but that's just to refresh your memory there. Yeah,
I
that
already
right?
have it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Is it different? No.
No,
Okay.
no. So the Historical Society had put in a request, which I know I had circulated. I never actually put it on a village board meeting. It got lost in the summer shuffle, I think. Came in after the July meeting and before the August, but the request is still out there, and I did indicate that I would follow up with the board on it. So essentially, they're looking for, they've outlined a couple of capital costs that they have, and they're looking for assistance from the village with those capital costs, simple as that.
can I just ask one structural question?
Yeah.
So the village owns the house.
Yeah.
The Historical Society runs the house for the village, is that the way it works?
So the village owns the property. The Historical Society has what's referred to as a triple net lease, which is they have all responsibilities of maintenance and ownership as an owner would of the property. So we do nothing for that property, except I think it's probably on our insurance policy, but
They don't pay any rent, obviously.
they don't pay rent.
But because the first thing I thought of was, and it's a bad example, but not really, is the whole thing that's going on with the Orton train station, right? So we're upset about that being in disrepair and everything, and it would be kind of hypocritical of us to then own a building that have historical significance that we're letting not to be prepared. I mean,
Right. They funded the full restoration of that building once the village negotiated the sale from Con Edison that owned it previously.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Con Ed owned it previously?
Yeah.
That's
The power substation is right behind it.
ah.
So they acquired that sometime, I forgot when it was, probably in the 50s or something. And they owned it, and I think they leased it out. But then eventually it was in disrepair, and we negotiated it away from them.
So there are some parallels to the train
Yeah.
station.
Sure there is. But it was done with the express intention of it being the home of the Historical Society that previously didn't have a home. And, that was the push.
Well, that's my
And I
take. on it.
guess at some point, the Historical Society looked at that train station
Apparently, yeah.
back in 2007.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Might have a few documents that show that. Did a little searching today. Yeah, but anyway, that's the situation up there. So we really don't, in essence, we don't act as the owner of that building, in terms of maintenance.
And we put no money into this building since it's been in existence.
Yeah, not that I can think of, no.
And how do they fund their budget every year? With donations?
They have memberships and they have
As far as-
one annual major fundraiser.
Right, okay.
Yeah, they're a 501c3, I'm positive, and
They are.
yeah, and so, presumably their 990 would tell you how they're funded. I haven't looked at it, but if that's something I can follow up on. It's
You
not-
spare time you didn't.
No, I wasn't that curious, but no, if it's a question that's an open question in your mind, I can certainly.
I guess what I'm saying, as long as, my instinct is that they have been extremely responsible fiscally with the property and stuff, and assuming that assumption is correct, then I feel like the village does have a responsibility to make sure the building doesn't fall into disrepair.
So I just say no to a handicap access.
Exactly. But we can't vote on it tonight anyway, right?
No, it's not really a vote. I just wanted to get a sense of what your reaction was. If there's a,
What's the total cost?
16,000.
well, it's,
No, that's for the
No.
roof.
That's
There's
one
more?
thing.
so 16 is the roof, and then the handicap accessibility is a range of 4,500 to 9,200. So, on the high side, it's 25,000, yeah.
Buildings cost money.
It sounds like they recently spent $11,000
Yeah.
on other repairs.
So they're
Yeah.
doing their part, so to speak.
It's been 20 years.
2003. Yeah, that I remember. I don't remember how much it cost, but I can remember the year.
Well, I think in general, people are open to this idea.
Yeah, okay, sounds
Okay. All right, so we'll, I'll work on hammering out the details on it and see where that goes.
Okay, next item is the review of a draft local law establishing the Architecture Advisory Committee.
So when last we discussed this topic, we went through, some of the changes that we were contemplating in terms of the Architectural Review Board and having that essentially be an architectural advisory committee. There was an openness at the last time we talked about this. There was an openness by the board to consider the changes, to try to, for the various things that we outlined, just try to streamline the process, make it more efficient from an applicant standpoint, but also preserve some of the important oversight that the Architectural Review Board is providing, and better focus their efforts on some of the more important applications. So after that discussion, we went back and asked Marianne to draft up legislation, at least take a first stab at the draft of legislation to implement this. You should recognize that what we have attached to the agenda, which you have a copy in front of you there. Okay. So that's the draft. You have that?
Is that the same as what I have electronically?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Yep.
good electronically.
Thanks.
So this is only a piece, and I'll let Marianne chime in, of course, but this is only a piece of what would be needed in order to implement this. This is the real guts of the process, but there's a lot of other tentacles throughout the code where the Architectural Review Board is referred to, and those sections would need to be updated as well. But we think this is a good check-in point to go over. So I don't know, Marianne, if you want to, I'm assuming you're hearing all this, right? You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, let me go through, I'll go through the law, comparing the draft to the current law, so you'll actually see what the changes are. But before we do that, overall, as Larry said, the big change is that what's the ARB would be the name is changed to Architectural Review Committee, would be merely an advisory board. It'd be advisory to the planning board on site development plan matters and to the building inspector on other matters. It won't make final decisions. It won't make rulings. You'll see how they fit into the process. But it'll be advisory and not making decisions. Now, what goes on, how it works now is for the most part, after the planning board is done with an application with the site development plan approval, then the applicant goes before the ARB and goes through the ARB process and has to end up at the end of that with an approval from the ARB. Usually it works out, once in a while there's something that's not approved. I think maybe we had 1 or 2 appeals, but mostly they go through. But anyway, occasionally on a few historic district houses, if they're contributing buildings, those have to go to the ARB first before they go to the planning board to get what's called a demolition permit, even though it's not completely demolishing the house. If you're changing, the part that faces the street, that's considered demolition under the code. That would go to the ARB first. And there's a couple matters like fences that are reviewed only by the ARB. They ordinarily wouldn't go to the planning board unless it happens to be part of the site development plan approval. Now, this proposed law changes the process altogether. Overall, and we'll go through it essentially line by line. All applications, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, all applications for site development plan approval would be sent to the ARB when they come in. The same time they're sent to the planning board, the same time they're sent to the village's consultants, myself, the engineering consultant, the landscape consultant. It would go to all of us. And then, and that's usually about 10 days before the planning board meeting. And then the ARC would then, at the planning board meeting or before the planning board meeting, make a recommendation. Which is how, how the engineers' comments come in, landscape architects' comments come in, my comments come in. So anyway, so I think it's important to know what the changes are going to be. So if you take the draft local law and then what's currently what the page says at the top, Board of Architectural Review from the current code. I'll walk you through what the changes are. Some of them are simple, some are bigger deals. For one thing, it was the name was changed from the Architectural Review Board to the Architectural Advisory Committee. And then the purpose was much the same as what's the current purpose, except that it says, assist the planning board and the building inspector with their review. And it eliminates the protection of the Irvington Historic District. That's not part of their purpose anymore. And we'll talk about that later. On how you want to deal with that, the whole demolition thing. We'll get to that later. If you'll see in the purpose in section 9-1, the goals, A was changed. Right now, the code reads, this is not related really to this, but just didn't make sense to me. Currently, it reads, improve the exterior appearance of buildings and other structures throughout the village. That's not really what it does. What it does, I think a better statement would be encourage appropriate design and good quality materials for the exteriors of buildings and other structures and signs throughout the village. I think it's a better statement of it. Other than that, okay. Then the next change is in let's see. Hold on a minute. Oh yeah, okay. Section 9-2 structural requirements. That was deleted from here, but we'll talk about it later. Maybe some of that should be included in what would be the standards for review, but it doesn't make sense to be here now. We'll talk about it later. Then the next section, what's 9-2 was 9-3 before. Mostly it's the same, except, there's 5 members. All the members have to be residents of the village of Irvington. One shall be a registered architect. They're appointed by the Board of Trustees. All that's the same. What's not in there anymore is, for how long their terms are and what happens if there's a vacancy and whatever, which are provisions that are similar to the provisions for planning board members and zoning board members and whatever, but it didn't make sense for this kind of committee. So they'll be treated much the same way that the village's other committees are. Okay. Oh, thanks, Larry. Then the section on meetings and powers, the formalities of meetings, was eliminated altogether. Since it's not a formal board, it's an advisory committee, that was just taken out. And they can, and there are no provisions for when they meet, that they're going to get this stuff, roughly 10 days before the planning board meeting. And it's whenever they get together, to review them, they'll decide how to review them. We don't need to tell them, who's the chairman and what's the quorum or anything like that. Again, treating them like you treat your other advisory committees. All right, then. All right, section with 9.5 is now not replaced by 9.3. Okay. And which applications will be sent to the architectural advisory committee before site plan approval? So it would be applications for site development plan approval. These ones shall be referred to the ARB. Construction, alteration, or addition to any required building site development plan approval, except for driveways, walkways, fences, retaining walls, pools, air conditioning units, generators, solar panels, propane tanks, and wireless telecommunications services facilities. The thinking that those things, driveways, walkways, pools, right, do require site development plan approval, but the thinking was that there's nothing, the ARB would need to review on those kinds of things. So if somebody comes in just for a swimming pool, it'll just go to the planning board and not to the ARB. Okay, and then in the Irvington Historic District, only with respect to contributing buildings. I think most of you understand, but there's the historic district, and within the historic district, only some of the buildings are contributing. Most of them are contributing, but only some of them are. And as to if it's a non-contributing building, it doesn't require any extra review, but except for fences. We'll get to that later. But so any application to demolish, which is essentially demolish isn't really mean demolish. If you look at the definition of it, it's anything that would essentially change the look of this historic building as it faces the street. Or if it's a side that doesn't face the street, if it removes or changes more than 50% of it. So those applications will be referred to the Architectural Review Committee, Architectural Advisory Committee for their opinion on them. And we're going to have to talk later. Right now, they make the decision about whether those things could be made. And there's a whole big section on it, which was worked out. Oh gosh, it was written kind of in response to Yellow House on Main Street coming down. That's what kind of prompted it. And so there's pretty elaborate provisions in there. And we're going to have to talk about what board you think should be making those decisions, but we'll get to that later. And then the applications for building permits that got referred to the Architectural Advisory Committee for its recommendation, and that's signs and awnings. In the Irvington Historic District only, all fences. Right now, all fences go to them, but this would be just fences in the Historic District. And again, it's fences whether they're on a contributing building or not, just because the fences in the Historic District can would affect the look of it. And then in the Irvington Historic District only, window changes or replacements and exterior elevation changes, but only on contributing buildings. I think those things, otherwise the village window changes and replacements go before the ARB. They won't anymore unless it's a contributing building in the historic district. Okay. And now that's a little different because there's those applications don't come in at a fixed time, like the site development plan applications come in on a particular date. I think it's a couple Wednesdays before the planning board meeting. So this will just as the building department gets it, it'll send those applications on to the Architectural Advisory Committee. Okay, then all right. What are sections 9.7 and 9.8 or disapproval of the application or denial or issuance of the building permit remember, they're not going to be disapproving, they're just going to be recommendations. So this is, I guess you should just read through 9.5, that the AAC may recommend approval or approval with conditions of any application referred to it, or it may recommend disapproval, provided that they find that the construction, alteration, addition, or demolition would not be compatible with the purposes in the beginning, and thereby would be detrimental to the desirability, property values, or development of the surrounding area, or wouldn't be in keeping with the harmonious development of the district. The AAC shall make its recommendation on any site development plan application referred to it prior to the planning board meeting at which the application will first be considered. Unless otherwise extended by the planning board, the AAC's failure to make a recommendation within said time limit shall be deemed to constitute a recommendation of approval. And with the building permit applications that to be submitted, they make their recommendation 14 days after the referral from the building department. And then D makes clear the Architectural Advisory Committee shall serve in an advisory manner to the planning board and the building department. The planning board and the building inspector shall not be bound by and may act contrary to the recommendations of the AAC. Okay, then 9.7 is just legalese. Okay, now you got section 9.9 there, Larry. That's the whole appeals process. You see that that's actually fairly new. That was added in 2016 because it wasn't at all clear where the appeals should be going. So that section was added, but it's not really necessary because they're not making any final decisions. So that's just coming out altogether. So 9.9 is coming out altogether. Okay, Larry. 9.10, I got, okay, 9.10 is right now 9.7. Okay, then demolition of buildings in historic district. It's taken out of this chapter, but it really should be included someplace else. And I guess the question is, who do you want to make the decision about whether there's let's call it, rather than demolition, significant change in one of the historic buildings, or a demolition or a significant change in the historic district. Do you want that decision made by the Board of Trustees or by the planning board? It doesn't necessarily have to be part of this law, but as Larry said, I've got like another long page. You don't need to go through it, but another long pages of laws that I'm going to have to change, assuming the board is comfortable with this or something like this. There's a bunch of other stuff in the code that's going to have to be changed, but and I don't have to bother you with them, but this one is pretty important, who you would want to be. And you may want to think about it. You don't have to give me an answer tonight, but you may want to think about what board you think should be making these decisions about contributing buildings in the historic district. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, Larry.
Well, I mean, my thought all along was that for something that the board at one point felt that demolition of a building in a historic district was very important, and so they wrote up a whole provision that tied it all together and put that responsibility at the feet of the ARB. My feeling is that if you still think that that's important, it probably should rest with you at this point. And that's only because there may not be particular expertise on the planning board at any given moment regarding architectural matters. So if the matter is an important matter that you deal with, then you as a board can retain a consultant, consult with an architectural expert, consult with your AAC directly if you want to, pick on their expertise. But you would control that and not the planning board. Just that was my sense. But again, it's.
We're talking about
Go ahead.
like substantial external changes that aren't covered here. Like I don't think we would have to approve.
Larry, I can't hear you. Larry Grodnick, I can't.
I was saying by demolition, we just just to understand, I know you explained this, but my understanding, so we're only talking about who would approve substantial external building changes, not things that are laid out elsewhere, like the fences in the historic district or solar panels. Like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about
Right,
substantial.
right. Somebody wants to come in and take down their porch and it's really gonna change the look of the front of the building. Or they want to put an addition on the front of the building, it's gonna look completely different, yes. Just so you know, I mean, if, you know, Larry's saying that, I agree with Larry that I think the Board of Trustees is the board that should be deciding these things. But don't worry, it's not like these things come up every month, you know? This law was enacted in 2015, and I think maybe there've been like, maybe, I mean, I could count on one hand, probably, you know, less than one hand, the number of, you know, demolition cases that were. Because actually, most of the people who own these buildings don't want to, you know, do anything with them.
I guess my question is why wouldn't the architectural review committee still, I guess you mean who would have the last word on it?
Right, who would make the decision about it? Because it's not a decision-making board. They may well, yes, I mean, I would say it would come to your board. As Larry said, you may well want to ask their, you know, what their opinion is on it.
Wouldn't it come with a recommendation? I mean, I would think, I know that when we were having the meetings, I thought the idea was, and even through my own experience renovating, just that the way the process was for homeowners was difficult because you could get through the planning board, then have to go to the ARB and then come back. So that streamlining that process. But I would think that the architectural review committee still would be the proper place for the recommendation, even if then that decision comes to the board. But I would assume they would be making the recommendation because I don't know that the expertise exists on the board either.
Yeah, well, right now, if you go to section 9.3 of the draft law, they do make recommendations. In the following applications will be referred to the AAC. It's the number 2. In the Irvington Historic District with respect to a contributing building, an application to demolish. So it does come for their recommendation, but the question is, who makes a decision whether that change can be made or not?
I guess I want to take it back to the conversation that we had when we were first talking about this. To me, the way I envision this happening is the ARC still has the expertise in the areas that they would sort of be opining on. So I always sort of envision this as they would make recommendations, and really, if that's the area of their expertise, that even if they made those recommendations to the planning board, that the planning board would have no reason to not follow those recommendations because that's the body that has the expertise. So I guess I envision this as then the planning board, absent some objection to what they were saying for some other reason, that they would approve that just the way they would approve all the other decisions that they have to approve as a planning board. I don't know that accepting out certain things would be necessarily. Like, I think I envision that working. You want to have, I think, Marian, you said this in one of the meetings, right? Like, different boards are going to defer to the experts in the areas. Like, when you're sort of giving us advice on like the changes in the law, we're not going to tell you your job either.
I think especially if there's agreement that AAC made a recommendation and the planning board agreed with it, then I don't think we need to weigh in. It sounds great. Maybe if there's a disagreement, I don't know, if the planning board wants to reject the AAC,
You can appeal to us or something.
yeah.
Because I think when we talk about this, I envision just a streamlining of the process, not necessarily changing roles, right? Because if the ARC has the expertise in the areas that they have the expertise, one would think, again, I think we talked about them volunteering their time, that nobody wants to volunteer their time and then their expertise is discounted. So I would envision people heeding to right, that role, right? If that's the role of the ARC, then they would make the recommendation, and again, absent some egregious thing or some big disagreement, that the planning board would follow those recommendations, and then absent, you know, unless there's some big disagreement, that would then kick to us, but I feel like we should streamline that process.
Wait,
Mary
what's,
Ann, can I-
Arlene, I missed the part about about it kicking to you. How would it kick to you?
Only if the planning board was going to, wanted to reject the recommendation of the
Yeah,
ARC.
no, yeah, well, okay, but right now, planning board decisions wouldn't go to the, don't go to the Board of Trustees. The only way to challenge a, planning board decision is in an Article 78 proceeding. The ARB decisions went to you because actually before we fixed the law, those would also go directly to the court. But we didn't, we just wanted to ease things up a little bit for residents. That's why we put a provision for the appeal to the Board of Trustees. So unless you want to say you want something written in that says, you know, if you could write something in that says, you know, if the planning board doesn't follow the advice of the architectural advisory committee, it should go to the Board of Trustees, then what are you going to do? Do you know what I mean?
I think that's what it should say, right? Because I do think that if to have an effective ARC that does, you know, that the only, so they make recommendations, the planning board doesn't follow them, and then the residents have to go to the courts, to me seems not a great result either, right? I think you want to, I would think you want to have the interim step, because I think we had this conversation about, generally speaking, I think, Mary Ann, are there many things where there's disagreement? I don't recall that.
No.
Yeah, so I would think that you would, again, I envision this working perfectly well, like everyone has their own roles. But I would say that we should write in an interim step, so that if the ARC makes a recommendation, we generally would expect the planning board to follow it, right? If that's the area that they cover. And then if there is a disagreement there, then it would come to the board before you move to the next step.
Mhm.
For everything or just demolitions? Just demolitions.
I think it's just demolitions, yeah, otherwise,
Yeah.
I think it's gonna get a little unwieldy, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, is that sort of how everybody feels? Well, I can write that into the next draft and.
Right, but we're still gonna follow 9.5D. Other than for
like what is 9.5D?
9.5D is where it specifically says that the planning board and the building inspector are not necessarily bound by, and they are contrary to the.
Yeah, you'll have to say something in there. If you want to have that thing, you're gonna have to say, you know, notwithstanding 9.5D, you know, if there's a. You know, if on a contributing building in the historic district, if the planning board doesn't follow the recommendation of the ARC or AAC, then it should go to the Board of Trustees. It's a little awkward, but let me if that's what other people want, I'll if that's what everybody agrees, then I'll write that in and we'll see how it works. I mean, not write it in and go, I mean, see how it works language wise and whether everybody's comfortable with it.
One small thing with the historic district, I remember we got some early feedback from Earl saying that he would recommend, you know, to expand that, not just historic district contributing buildings, but, you know, other village-wide registered historic buildings, like for example, the Octagon House, this thing is not in the historic district, so it would not be in these rules. And I don't know, like, I don't know how people feel about it. To me, it seems like a reasonable change, but
I don't know, we don't have that many, right? Villa or Octagon House.
I think
I mean, there are, however, yes, there are, however, other buildings that are like on the County of Westchester list of historic buildings that aren't any of these, you know, aren't the landmarked buildings. There's not really so much concern about Octagon House and Villa Luaro, I think, because and also what are the other what's it other Villa, Larry?
Oh, Villa in the Woods?
Villa, yeah, Villa Woods, yeah, because those are landmarked, and they're, you know, the National Trust would, you know, prevent them from making any changes, you know, so those are protected, those have a degree of protection. But there are other historic buildings in the village. In fact, that Earl sent a letter that came to the planning board and went an application just, I guess, was it last week, that the house was and it's not designated, it's not in the historic district, it was a house on Jeffrey Park. But it has it's on the Westchester County list of, you know, historic buildings, and it would qualify to be on the National Register or the State Register. It turned out not to, and the question was, can the planning board consider this? And it could, because under its standard, it's, you know, can consider historic buildings even if they're not historic with a capital H, you know. But it turned out it was irrelevant on this, because the people were just changing the driveway or something, a patio, what wouldn't affect the building at all. But so that's a long way of saying, Larry, yes, there are other historic buildings in the village that wouldn't get picked up on this. And we kind of had that discussion a few years ago, right, Larry, in the context, Larry Lonkey was on the board, and Larry Schaffer, and on the when we were talking about landmarking, local landmarks.
Right.
And I think
right, yeah.
everybody just decided that they didn't want, if somebody wants to landmark their building, they can come in and say they want to be a local landmark, but the village wasn't going to impose it on anybody.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there definitely has been a balancing act over the years of imposing additional regulations and protection of historic buildings, right? So it's just a balancing act. So that's where the line was cut. I mean, you can obviously re-debate anything, but that's where that came from. So
that's compelling.
I can't hear you, Mitch.
I said that argument is compelling, you know, as to why it's not a need to add them.
Yeah. Okay. All right, then the next
Go
one.
ahead.
Oh,
No, so go ahead.
Marianne, hold on a second.
No, I was just saying, I'd be curious to get if Rick has any feedback while he's here.
I can't hear you.
I was wondering if we should hear from Rick. I mean,
You can, if you want, sure, of
Yeah.
course.
You can hear me.
Well, she won't be able to hear it.
Just one clarification. Before appeals came to you, they went to the ZBA, not Article 78. But beyond that, in reading through all the paperwork, all the documents, I'm at a loss really to see how this speeds up the process in most aspects. Not all, some it will, but some it certainly won't. The only way it could is at the cost of the ARB, meaning what you're asking for in the paperwork is on a moment's notice. Within 14 days, we have to meet and you know, take up a particular issue or not. That means we could have 2 meetings a month, which I don't think is fair, especially asking people who are volunteers to get together and make recommendations, only recommendations, nothing that's going to have teeth.
I mean, you know, this is up for debate, obviously. Right. So I think that really just relates to the non-planning board applications, the ones that go through the building department, and we imposed a 14-day turnaround on comments, right? Mary Ann, that's,
Yeah, it is, but it would also mean, we also say that, they should make their decision, before the next planning board meeting, so they'll get the stuff about 10 days before. And, so it's not it's not a deadline in terms of numbers of days, but it's essentially a deadline as well.
right.
How is that different time-wise from what the current situation is?
Well, now they don't go, well, actually, under the code, I mean, the ARB can review it before the planning board meeting, but mostly that's not done. So what happens is they get site development plan approval, and when that's all done, and they go in to apply for their building permit, Ed then sends them over to the ARB. So they go over to the ARB after they get site plan approval.
So I think the way to resolve this is that, again, just kind of thinking out loud here, if the ARC has their meeting in between the planning board submission deadline and the actual planning board meeting itself, if that's their regular monthly meeting, then they would be able to comply with any of the planning board application submissions. And then for the non-planning board submissions that they have to consider, we probably would need to lengthen out the amount of time that they have to respond to 30 days, right? So that they would pick up any applications at that monthly meeting, they would pick up any applications received for the 30 days prior. You know what I'm saying? So I think it would.
Yeah, that would, yeah, I see what you mean, because depending on where it falls, yeah. When the building department sends it over, yeah. So that's an easy change.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a bit about your concern about them not sort of, I don't envision, again, I think I see this as like different experts, and so I would hope, and I think we could address it, right? Like if the ARC is making recommendations that are routinely like discounted, nobody's, I mean, I personally wouldn't be volunteering either for people to just if you spend time. So I would hope that's not going to happen, right? That's not the case, but I do think that we would be committed to looking at this again, because I don't think that's the intention at all, right? That should not happen. I still think different people have their areas of expertise, which is why I said, about the demolitions of buildings over the historic district. I don't want that coming to me first. Like, what do I know about that, right? I would like that to come to me with some kind of recommendation that I could look at, because that's not my area of expertise. So I think that if we find ourselves in a position where the ARC feels that they're discounting or not really following the recommendations, that we would need to revisit this. But I'm hopeful that that's not going to occur.
Yeah, we pointed that out as a potential pitfall in this whole process, is that if you could create a dysfunctional system where, well-meaning volunteers are making recommendations and other well-meaning volunteers are ignoring them. We know that can exist. That's human nature. We don't expect that to happen, as you said. So, but it obviously bears monitoring,
Right, and if it happens, obviously we have to revisit.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Because we're going to obviously have a group of people who are not going to volunteer their time to be ignored.
It'll be completely dysfunctional.
It'll be dysfunctional.
No question.
I mean, I am optimistic that will be followed, but
right.
I will also say that people think I'm optimistic when I have nothing to be optimistic about. So,
all right.
Take
so what are the next steps here?
So
Okay, wait a minute. Actually, I wasn't done going through this.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. So wait, am I still there? Because I lost my screen. Oh, there we go. Okay. And just by the way, the applications may have gone to the ZBA, the ARB applications may have gone to the ZBA before, but the ZBA doesn't have jurisdiction under the code. They only have, not only under Irvington law, but under state law, you have, you can appeal from administrative officials. That's what their jurisdiction is. Okay. Section 912 on solar energy equipment. Now that will not be reviewed by the AAC. That's going to be reviewed by the architectural review consultant. And if it's ground equipment, the ground equipment requires site development plan approval. So then the ARC consultant would be making his recommendation to the planning board. For rooftop panels, those are just approved by the building inspector. So the architectural review consultant would make a recommendation to the building inspector. But you'll see in this section, hold on. Oh, let me get the full screen. Okay. There's a notice requirement for solar energy equipment. It's in that first paragraph. The notice has to get sent to, I think it's any adjacent neighbors. And they actually do sometimes, have something to say about it. So I assume you still want that notice. You want the neighbors to be notified. Do you or
Well, I think
don't
we
you?
may
I'm
want
gonna have to try to figure out.
the entire solar panel law and see if we can make it easier for people to install solar panels than we have in the past. Also requires a public hearing.
I'm sorry, Larry, was it Larry Lunkey? What were you saying on that?
I was saying, I think that we may want to review the entire solar panel guidelines to attempt to make it easier in general for people to put solar panels up.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
No, that's fine. We can get to that. Fortunately, you've still got those guidelines so that even, because I know when, and Larry, actually, you might want to explain the architectural review consultant. You seem to understand that a little bit better. I had some concern, like, what will this person's standards be? But at least for solar panels, we've got pretty detailed standards. Whether they have to be changed or not, I don't know. But I'm assuming, though, do you still want the neighbors to be notified or not? Because if you do, I'm going to have to try to find some other place to put this provision.
What's the point of notifying the neighbors?
What was the
That they-
point?
They don't want their neighbor to get solar.
Happens to be an early array, or it's going to shine in the windows.
Yeah, the way it's placed, I'll get reflections and I don't know. I have no idea, because those, like I said, if they're on houses, they don't come to the planning board. So I have no idea how often neighbors have something to say about it. Larry Schaffer, do you have any idea?
No, I don't, but actually Rick's here, maybe, so what was,
In the last 3 or 4 applications, nobody showed up and nobody called in from online. However, before that, there were several people who came to the meeting, didn't want to trust the online experience, came to the meeting and had various issues and concerns.
How often,
Well,
like,
how about this? I put the notice provision in somewhere, and at whatever point, if Larry Lonke wants to, or not just Larry, but if the rest of the board wants to consider modifying the solar guidelines, we can deal with that as well at that time.
I agree. I don't think that we should change anything without a full review, so let's leave it in for now.
right?
Yeah, okay.
I was just curious, like, how often, like, if a neighbor would come and complain, like, how often would that change
Hasn't so far.
wasn't so far. Thanks.
Those rules are very explicit.
Right.
I don't know why. I don't know how you can, improve upon that, but because there's very little that I think
Right.
since they have been written, there's been no denial.
Yeah.
And I think that was our reasoning for removing that from the purview of the ARB as it is right now, because we spent a lot of time writing the guidelines, which I don't have up on the screen. I might be able to. I think they're linked here, but there's a set of other guidelines, and you either follow them or you don't.
Right.
It's pretty non-discretionary. Which also then lends itself to the question about why do you have the notice provision, which I don't disagree with you, by the way, Larry. Because I mean, we get constant, I've sat in on enough meetings with other sustainability directors in other communities that we get berated by how complicated our solar law is. So I've heard that enough to know that some of what's in here is probably a little bit, it was kind of, I would say the way this was written, it was coming from the standpoint that solar panels are not necessarily good. And we have to make sure that if they are going to be put up, that they're put up in a proper way, or that they're ugly, Whereas now I think, and I just think things have changed. I think people's perceptions have changed, and the world has changed. And I don't think you don't have those arrays that were mounted on brackets at various angles on roof. Everything now is flush mounted that I've seen. I mean, virtually everything. So what's the issue?
Right.
That's just me. I'm
Yeah.
not a voting
No.
member here, but
That's good to hear.
that's what I hear.
Yourself
Yeah.
Talking to other environmental, communities.
Yeah. I mean, there's an action that we can undertake under the Climate Smart Communities program, which involves implementing what they call a streamlined solar permit. I don't even look at that. I don't even read it because it's not possible under the way our code's written. A unified solar is what it's called, unified streamlined solar permit, where it's basically a similar application in all communities around us, and we can't do that.
Okay,
So,
So
So
yeah,
what-
that'll be discussed.
to be continued. Okay, go to 913, Larry, local landmarks. Okay, so I don't think we have any local landmarks yet. But it says the ARB shall have the power to approve or disapprove the demolition. Oh, no, I take that back. Demolition, removal, relocation, exterior reconstruction, exterior alteration, or exterior restoration of any local landmark designated pursuant to Chapter 144. And that relates to the discussion we were talking about, earlier about people, volunteering either their property or something on their property as a local landmark. I think actually we do have, although I
We
don't
do
know
have
that
one.
they're, yeah,
But they were, it's on the National Register, the Octagon House, if I recall correctly. Or at least they were contemplating submission of it, but they're on the
Oh.
National Register anyway, so.
yeah. Well, there's like on the Mercy property, there's a George, I think a Benjamin Franklin, marker there. And then there was also one on the Fee property, that, when they approved the 3040 South Broadway, when they approved that they made the made the developer, take care of that. In fact, that's how that thing got its name, Marker Ridge, because it was a post office marker that had to be preserved. But I don't know, but right now I don't know that we've got that many, but at some point you might, but which board would have I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that maybe is something that it would make sense for the Board of Trustees to do. Again, it's not going to come up much. And it's not like, you know, deciding what a building should look like. It's
I don't know, I think you can just roll this into the same process that is undergone for demolition of historic buildings in the historic district.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, just add and locally designated landmarks.
Okay.
Just in the interest of streamlining things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, I'll do that as the next step. We'll see how that goes. Okay, now. Next question is whether you want to specify standards of review. Right now, if you go back to our current law, Larry, if you put that on
Yep.
section 9.2.
Yep.
Right now, these are the only standards, and they leave a lot of stuff out. They seem to have been developed for that amended 2016 has nothing to do with the substance of it. It was just adding attached one-family dwellings. This was written in 1965, and this is what these are the architectural standards that houses adjacent to each other in any direction shall not look alike. Minimum variety in appearance shall be achieved. Clearly what was going on here was, you know, concerns about, you know, developments, multi-developments. And then, okay, then B, in approved subdivisions when building permits are applied for, location of all houses on the lots adjacent to and opposite the one being applied for shall also be shown where 3 or more houses front on a straight or slightly curved street. Anyway, they're very specific, but there's nothing the matter with them really, but it seems to me that there are other standards you might, you know, other architectural standards that you might consider important. And right now, the only thing you would have to rely on are you know, things that further whatever the purposes are in 9.1. Now, Larry, did you copy the Briarcliff Manor ones? It happened because I was looking at the Briarcliff Manor law because there's this, you know, not a whole lot different from what we're proposing. And they had some standards that to me made some sense. And I wanted to know whether because remember, these are going to be standards, well, for the Architectural Advisory Committee and also for this architectural review consultant. Let me see, what I have in front of me. Yeah. Okay, if you see, forget about the process. It's just the, you know, determining factors. And they've got the same thing about similarity and dissimilarity that we have. But then they have more stuff like it shouldn't be visually offensive, incompatible, or other poor qualities of exterior design, including but not limited to considerations of this at the very bottom. Considerations of the compatibility or discord of colors or incompatibility of the proposed building or structure with the terrain. What else? Yeah, and then on their limitations, the committee shall limit its consideration of applications to a reasonable and professional review. It shouldn't unduly restrict new or innovative building types, materials, or construction methods. Individual initiatives to be encouraged. In its endeavor to improve the quality of design in the village, the committee shall consider cost as one factor along with design in its efforts to achieve the purposes and objectives of this chapter. Anyway, I wondered whether people were interested in including standards like that.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. It is,
That's
yeah.
important.
So you know what, why don't you think about it and I mean, if you
Hold on,
wanted,
Mary.
okay,
Hold on one second.
No, I was just going to say, the fact that we're considering bringing in an architectural review consultant, I think, in general, we might want to define things a little bit more to what our village standards are. If this is someone who is more of a consultant as opposed to a committee of residents that are making that decision. So I think it's worth looking into for sure.
Well, if you want, I could include something in another draft. You can always cross it out, change it, whatever. But it makes it so, I mean, you do have those standards right now and then, but there's kind of like a big hole in them,
I'm just laughing that it says visually offensive building. So our big hole is it doesn't say that you can't put a visually offensive home in.
This is a big hole, actually.
I'd love to know what is
Yeah.
offensive though,
Well, I was going to say, yet you can't restrict new or innovative building types.
Well, you could leave out visually offensive,
But we don't have to use this exact list, right?
No, this is
No,
just
yeah,
a,
no, you don't exactly, but it's
I'm saying that as a statement, not a
it's
question.
something to work from. Sometimes it's easier to change something than just, make it from scratch.
Absolutely. The blank page is terrifying.
Right.
So this is all we're using today, and then I guess the expertise of the people on the ARB. That's we don't have any any more specific guidelines.
this is it. Well, what was on the screen there, yeah.
So Marianne, forgive me, the lawyer in me and the copy editor in me, there's no 9.6, it goes from 9.5 to 9.7. Is there something that's going to be added there, or it's just a number error?
I'm sorry.
On your draft, not on
Oh.
your draft.
Yeah. No, I don't know what happened. I probably had something else there. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't being pedantic. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't.
Good catch. So what did I think I might have missed some of the conversation. So should I try to work in some standards or not in the next draft?
I think Larry L's point is that we have a consultant. The consultant shouldn't be making policy decisions, so we should be giving the consultant guidelines as to what they're consulting
Okay.
on.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
I
okay,
don't think any of us like offensive being in there.
okay.
Good word.
All right, and then, okay, this is really just a small point and I'm done with the questions I need to ask you before I do another draft. And right now, in the, law that we wrote for the, was it the multifamily, what's the new district? The multifamily district, the multifamily
MFO.
residential.
MFO, multifamily
Oh,
office.
multifamily office district. There's a provision in there that you got kind of a coverage bonus or an FAR bonus if you preserved a building of local historical significance. And that was not limited to buildings that were designated landmarks. We're talking about the one on the, how quickly they forget.
The Carafiello property,
Excellent.
and the Maxon property. There was a
Maxon
couple of-
property. There was a, the old house on the Maxon property. People wanted to, encourage the preservation of that building. And so that there was a coverage bonus and an FAR bonus for buildings of local historic significance. And what's of local historical significance would be decided by the Architectural Review Committee. I'm sorry, the ARB. Do you want that to be decided by the Architectural Advisory Committee or the Board of Trustees? Would be my question.
I would think the committee.
Yeah, the committee.
Okay.
It's a recommendation from the committee though, right? It's not a decision.
Okay, who makes a
There's
decision?
Yeah, there's no mechanism for a decision out of the committee, so
Right.
it's probably Board of Trustees. upon
Board of
recommendation.
Trustees on the recommendations, the AAC. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little, yeah.
Again, it's one of those things that won't come up much, but when it does, it's a huge deal.
Right. And those aren't the situations we're trying to streamline here anyway, we just want to get to the right.
Yeah. No, it's just that I could, all the other changes that I have to make, I'm making the law, I can do without here. I don't think at this point I haven't, because I went through them all and these are the ones that were open questions for you.
Okay.
So I'm done. Did you have any questions about this or overall thoughts? I mean, are you comfortable with it? Should I go on to a second draft?
Say yes.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're gonna make those changes with the timing, right? Or does that
Yes.
have to go?
Yeah, we'll change
yeah.
it to 30 days. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Mary.
thank you.
Thanks.
And Rick,
Yeah.
thanks for being here and
Thank you.
Thank you.
participating.
And having to sit through the first 4 items.
Okay, I guess, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? To adjourn.
Thank you.
Okay,
Take care,
bye.
Mary.
See you.